stood about 30 feet from what people refer to as a Wendigo, thought I was going to die. I can post a story if interested, but I've tried before and the thread was washed out by being redacted.
I'm calling BS. That thing would have ripped you apart if you were feet from it.
Maybe. Maybe not. All depends on whether or not Anon is a Templar of /K/.
Not a Templar from /K/, but I'm almost certain I came across it after it had killed 2 German shepherds. Which might have been what saved me. When I first saw it, I thought it was a big white dog. It was crawling on all fours. It never stood up, never vocalized, just watched me. It only moved when I moved, but it was more of a maneuver, like it was trying to get a good look. It was incredibly fast though. Yeah, I can do that. I don't think I'm going to greentext though, so sorry if it's a little long. From about the age of 16 to the age of 21, 24 now, I used to go on walks late at night. My sleep schedule was messed up after school ended, and so I spent most of my time awake during the late night, early morning hours. But living in a more suburban area, it was never really an issue. That isn't to say I live in a nice area, just that it's not really as crime-ridden as it could be. But I digress. I had worked out a pretty solid schedule for these walks, leaving at anywhere between 10-12 at night and coming back either when I had had enough serenity for the night or my legs began to ache. Generally though, each walk would last 3 to 5 hours, during which I would travel out of my neighborhood into the neighboring areas. Another thing to note is that my neighborhood, for whatever reason, only has a handful of streetlights, usually at the small stop sign intersections. Because of this, I became very comfortable with being in the dark, and developed a love for the moon. I always made it a point to leave a little earlier during full moons to enjoy the peace, silence, and the glow that pure moonlight casts over everything. So anyway, onto this particular night. It was fall, I remember, because the air had just begun to carry a chill, and a really specific sort of smell that seems so come with the changing of the seasons. I left a little later than normal that night, having been distracted by gaming. I do distinctly recall staring up at the moon, and being overcome by a strange feeling. I don't really know how to describe it, only that it felt different. Even now though, I think it was the schedule being off-kilter that particular night that caused the feeling, because that's just what makes the most sense. Anyway, I took my normal path, heading down a few streets of little note and making my way toward a favorite stretch of road. It's one of those that have no street lights to speak of, and the houses along the sides are bigger, the type with the big yards pushing the buildings 100 or so feet out from the roadside. I remember seeing the road and staring into the darkness, accustomed to the sight. Even with the moon as bright as it was, it always gets brighter inside. It's just a trick of the shadows, since there are some spots on the road that are covered pretty heavily with trees, and I was almost overcome with a very specific feeling, one that I hadn't felt in several years of taking these walks: dread. To be completely honest, I was surprised at myself, and irritated, and it was that irritation that made me continue walking. I ended up quietly humming to myself as I entered the darkness, Lullaby Derek and the Dominoes, if you're curious, and had made it about 100 years down the road, when I heard a loud scuffling down the driveway to my left, about 10 yards away from me. I moved into a heavily shaded area and watched, noting that whatever was moving down the gravel driveway was big, and sounded like a dog. Much to my surprise, it seemed to be a huge, white dog. At least, until my eyes focused on it. In the moonlight, sometimes things take on an eerie glow and shapes can be misconstrued, so I was only watching it with curiosity until it got a little closer, and I realized that it wasn't white fur shining in the moonlight, but skin. Bare, pale skin. This caused a shift in my perspective, and I began inspecting the rest of this new sight, only to realize that it wasn't a dog at all, but a man. A very tall, incredibly emaciated man. His skin was pulled tight over his skeleton, and he trotted along on all fours as if it were the most natural thing in the world. At this point, I was a definite combination of freaked out and interested, so I took a single step closer, as quietly as I could, and squinted my eyes to get more specific details. Its legs seemed to be normally shaped, as far as humans go, but the forearms were elongated, giving it a very surreal hunch that was, obviously, not human. Oh, another thing to note is that its head was completely bald, and the moonlight hit it and made it glow, which is sort of funny. And then I noticed it was looking at me. The light reflected off of its eyes with a dim yellow shine, which is what drew me into getting a good look at its face. It was featureless. Not blank, but there was nothing notable about it. It had no ears that I could see, its nose, if it wasn't a trick of the light, was very small. No lips to speak of. And it just stared. We stared at each other for several long seconds, my mind reeling as I struggled to come to some sort of solution for how I would get out of this situation. But none came, that is, until a car's headlights flashed down the road. In my idiotic half-panic, I turned my head to see if the car was coming down the road I was on, and as soon as I did, I heard a rapid, heavy shuffling. I jerked my head back and the thing was gone. I struggled with keeping my fear in check and made a cursory scan of the area around me, and I found it, sitting in the yard to my left. It was about 20 feet away this time, sitting in the big yard just outside of the light being given off by the home's porch light. It was one of those huge yards I mentioned earlier, so there was some space between it and the house too. The only reason I noticed it at all was because I had caught the very end of its movement, otherwise the yard was heavily shaded by a bunch of trees. So, I stared. And it stared. We watched each other, me standing on the side of the road in the dark, and it hunched down in this yard, motionless as far as I could see. Finally, my mind settled into a solution I could actually make work. I have phone shortcuts, and I know my best friend is awake, as I had been talking to him before I left. So I called him, never taking the phone from my pocket until I heard the muffled "what's up?" of my friend answering. I placed my hand over the light sensor of the screen to make sure it was dark when I pulled it from my pocket, placed the phone to my head, and said, "I'm on, street name, get here as soon as you can." Luckily, he was able to understand how serious I was being, and hung up immediately. Thus began the longest 5 minutes of my life. I closed my phone and slid it back into my pocket, never taking my eyes off the thing. Fortunately for me, it seemed keen on simply staring in turn. I don't remember my thought process in detail, only that one thought of "I can't believe this is happening" repeating over and over every few seconds. Then, mercifully, headlights. Knowing that it was my friend, I began slowly backing away toward the oncoming car. The creature, apparently realizing that the vehicle was heading in our direction, turned and bolted away, slamming into the fence between the yard it was in and the driveway it had come from, scaling the fence and disappearing. Feeling safe enough to turn, I was getting ready to run to my friend's car. I slowly rotate toward the headlights to see not my friend's car, but a police patrol car. I froze in place as the headlights washed over me and the car just cruised on by, my friend's vehicle right behind it. He pulled over and I was in the car before he even put it in park. Not that it mattered much, because I told him to get me the fuck out of there immediately. He kept asking questions, but it was around that time that the full weight of the experience hit me, and I just sort of sat there in silence, trying to process what I had seen. He drove off, and I noticed that the police car had stopped in the driveway that the thing had come from, with 2 officers getting out and making their way toward the home. It occurred to me then, that if they had been called by the owner of the house, a woman with her 2 big German shepherds, that if she had reported a disturbance, the cops would most likely have stopped and questioned me. Unless they were given a more specific description. And like I said, I haven't seen those dogs since.
Geez. As someone who used to take a lot of walks at night, before I got chased out of the local park, and all the way to a fallback point by someone making elk calls, you acted a shitload smarter than I ever would have in that situation. Also, even worshipping at the altar of /k/ would likely not have saved you in that situation, if it could move that bloody fast. This happened in friggin' suburbia? Did the neighborhood border a large forest, perhaps? The alternative is not something I want to ponder on at the moment.
Yeah, it was fast. For a little more accurate perspective, The space it cleared in the time it took me to look behind myself and then back was about 40 feet, diagonally from where our positioning was before. But no forest. That, specifically, is something I've thought a lot about in the last few years. I don't know why it was here, of all places. I'm not even sure where it could have come from, or gone. What? Oh yeah, sure. A fucking 7-foot monstrosity with no lips or tongue was just trying to ask me where the nearest restroom was, huh? I think I forgot to mention this in my green text, but it looked like it was just about to take a chunk out of my face. Its mouth was wide open, like, this image sums it up pretty well.
Modified the Anons archived post with the new information.
But no forest. That, specifically, is something I've thought a lot about in the last few years. I don't know why it was here, of all places.
I have theories. I partially do not want to share them, for fear in doing so might make them legitimate. Something that moves that bloody fast invalidates way too many forms of infantry portable weaponry.
I'm not even sure where it could have come from.
That's relatively easy to pin down.
Or gone.
Got theories. Not many of them good. Sewers tilde.
I don't know why I didn't consider sewers before. That's a little troubling. But if you've got ideas, please tell me. I don't really leave the house at night anymore, and the more I can settle this, the better. I really feel like I lucked out, and I miss going on walks at night, but I'm not feeling like running into it again.
From what he was hinting at, what with the infantry portable weapons bit, the theory would probably involve some secret government super soldier experiment. But maybe I'm way off.
Maybe. I don't know. There's no answer that I feel has been good enough, in a weird sort of way. Like no explanation is adequate for what happened. I've told other, older relatives about it, and the general consensus from them is always something akin to "there are old things out there anon," and that's sort of it. Like what, the French? That's easy for you to say, you old bastard. But if you've got ideas, please tell me.
Okay. So the nearest medium-large forest doesn't see much human transportation anymore, at least not, hypothetically, that of the overgun nature, and in mass numbers. So it leaves the forest, migration, and seeks out easier prey, since it's got used to the taste of man-flesh and would rather not have to deal with aim-dodging hunting parties in order to slake its hunger. Or maybe it has been forced to flee from its former hunting grounds because of said overgunned hunting groups, S&D squads. In any case, it moves to the local town, outskirts of a minor city, and begins stalking the streets. Check the missing persons reports in your area, see if there's an uptick in missing vagrants or a downtick in the local homeless population, and I feel like a fucking sociopath for even considering that idea. I mean, thinking of an entire demographic as beast kibble? FFS.
I don't really leave the house at night anymore, and the more I can settle this, the better. I really feel like I lucked out, and I miss going on walks at night, but I'm not feeling like running into it again.
Pro tip, don't. Do not walk outside at night, no matter what.
The theory would probably involve some secret government super soldier experiment.
No, this is something else, something that predates modern governments. This is something that those that lived here before, those of the First Nations, screw this Indian term, knew somewhat well. Maybe, a hybrid of some of those creatures, somewhat like a coy wolf. The infantry portable weapon bit? Just thinking of such kind of weapons one would take out on a hunting expedition to gank one of these things. The main problem is the aim dodging.
The thing about beasts is that they don't know how guns work and thus can't dodge your shots. Unless it's supposed to be really smart or something, I don't know. But then you'd think it wouldn't go out and fuck around with people and dogs and shit in a populated area.
It's funny you say that, about the homeless population. It was an observation I'd made a long time ago, when I was still regularly walking. Remember, I've been wandering this city for years by the point of this story. We don't have a homeless population. I've never seen a homeless person in this city. Just outside of it, sure, there are camps. But here? Nope. I've only ever come across trash and stuff, what I assumed to be the remains of a camp.
Well, whatever it is, the police obviously didn't run across it, and they didn't know to be looking for you either, but apparently they did know that they should be looking for something. The question is, what were they told?
The thing about beasts is that they don't know how guns work and thus can't dodge your shots. Unless it's supposed to be really smart or something, I don't know. But then you'd think it wouldn't go out and fuck around with people and dogs and shit in a populated area.
It might have survived long enough, and/or witnessed other creatures, others of its kind, or separate subspecies that don't share their holy shit fucking chia speed, get /k/illed by the previously easy prey that are now armed with bang sticks.
But then you'd think it wouldn't go out and screw around with people and dogs and stuff in a populated area.
But then again, there are incidents of bears and stuff wandering into downtown areas, albeit not hunting for man flesh, might be an aberrant specimen.
But apparently they did know that they should be looking for something. The question is, what were they told?
Probably were informed of something in the residence yard by the same individual. Sheesh, can you just imagine watching something outside tear apart your pets?
They probably would have had guns drawn for that. Even if they did just think it was a coyote or wolf or bear or mountain lion or whatever lives in that area.
Taking a name so it's easier to differentiate. This isn't really an area where guns are a common thing. Lots of middle-aged, middle-class white people living near a city, if that helps.
Partially advise reaching out to her, or to members of her family that might live in the same house.
This isn't really an area where guns are a common thing. Lots of middle-aged, middle-class white people living near a city, if that helps.
As if it wasn't bad enough that the thing can name dodge, it's hunting in a no guns, less guns state too. Okay, revising earlier comment, it's moved out of the woods to find better hunting grounds because nobody really goes there anymore. Though the cops, at least, would still be armed. Checking the account, Wendigo does not mention whether or not the officers threw their service pistols on approach, only that they moved towards the property in question.
I'm trying to recall if I saw them leave with weapons drawn, but all I remember is seeing both front doors open on the patrol car, and the silhouettes of the officers moving up the driveway. The headlights were throwing shadows, so I can't saw for sure either way, only that there were two of them.
True, Wendigo didn't mention it, but I would have thought if the police had their weapons drawn that would have been something that they would have mentioned. So did the police have their guns drawn?
Chances are by this point, Wendigo has moved on from the thread, and might not search it up again, but I sort of wish to know, what city is this? Not for any sort of individual identification of Wendigo, but merely to file the population center in question into a list of places I will never friggin' dread in, ever.
The city is Orangevale, California. It's not very noteworthy, really. Out of the way, but still pretty close to actually nice areas for most people, I suppose.
Orangevale, California. The no gun state. As in part of the damn Sacramento metropolitan zone? I'm going to crack a bottle of Absolute and ponder this shit for a while. Mind is sort of gone ATM.
Yep, that's really what throws me off. There's nowhere it could really be living, unless it wandered in from the foothills, or lives in the sewers.
I don't think it was a Wendigo. It sounds like it was as afraid of you as you were of it.
That's an aspect of the story that I think is what sticks out to most people I've told, but we also have to remember that the majority of stories told by other people about Wendigos are fake. I'm of native descent, and a part of the interest for me is the lore, and of all the stories of the things we call Wendigos only really focus on them being hungry. There's nothing to say they're anything more than a different type of predator. That being the case, if it wasn't a Wendigo, that's what it took the form of. At least the popular form.
I've read a handful of stories about people seeing things like this on here, May I ask what tribe your heritage is?
Choctaw. Possibly Choctaw and something else, but that's only been hinted at, and my grandfather didn't really give a damn about his family and died before I was old enough to ask him. Also, that picture's pretty good. Make it skinnier, and make the arms a little longer, and that's damn near spot on.
Oh, that's interesting. My native heritage is from a similar region. I'm Miami. Have you had any experiences with lore specific to your tribe? Also, I could redraw the picture if you like. It would just take a few minutes. How is this?
Holy fuck, dude. That's insane. The only thing I saw is that the arms are too long, now. From what I could see on the thing, they were about the same length as its legs. Which is why its gait was so strange, and gave it only a slightly irregular hunch. Its back end was kinda raised up, which makes me think maybe it just leaned harder on its front.
How does this go find it?
Yep, that's basically the shape of it. Even they had turn. Shit's crazy.